Welcome to the Building Materials Sales and Marketing Podcast, presented by Mark Mitchell, a sales and marketing consultant who specializes in helping building materials companies overcome difficult sales problems. Mark is the author of the book Building Materials Channel Marketing and a frequent speaker at industry events.
Hello, this is Mark Mitchell from Wizard Strategy. Glad you could join me today. Today I'd like to talk about what I see are the 4 biggest ways that a sales message fails in building materials. And a sales message can either be what a salesperson says, it could be the message on the side of your trade show booth, it could be what your website says. It's what you're communicating to the customer that's going to get them to stop and consider why your product might be a better choice for them. And that's where I find so many times companies just fall right on their face because they haven't thought enough about how important these words are. And it's not a lot of words. It actually is very few words that starts the customer down a path that says, this is something I should continue to pay attention to. And so the first problem that I see, and probably the most widespread, and one that I've just seen for years, and that is that when you present your product to the customer, it too often is presented in terms of the benefit their customer will derive from it rather than what they will derive from it. So, for example, you could have a feature or product that's going to make a home more energy efficient. And I see salespeople and I see sales messages all the time trying to tell the builder he'll build a more energy efficient home. And the problem is the builder isn't really looking to build a more energy efficient home. The builder already thinks he builds a very energy efficient home or energy efficient enough, depending on how the builder looks. And so he looks then and says, well, the home buyer is going to buy from me is going to have a more energy efficient home. That doesn't mean that I'm going to sell any more homes. That doesn't mean that I'm going to make any more profit per home. That just means the home buyer is going to have a more energy efficient home. And that would be nice, but that really isn't going to help me. So I see whether it's a product you're selling to an architect or a contractor or a big box buyer or a builder, I find so many times that the benefit that you're communicating to your customer who's actually going to be the one who makes the decision to buy it, you're giving them a benefit that is not really a benefit to them. It happens so frequently because you start out and you look at your product and it's very obvious to you the main benefit of the product, and then secondarily is who is the person that benefits from it. Most building material companies don't stop a minute and say, okay, that's great. That's painfully obvious that if a new home has this product of ours, they will save energy. That's great. But you need to step back and say, who are all the people that are going to need to be involved in order for this to be a successful sale? So, for example, it's certainly the builder. It also may be a subcontractor. And to each of those audiences, you need to step back and say, what's in it for them? Why should they want to use this product? And you can always find some good reasons, but you have to stop and think those through. So that's the first area where I find people are so enthused, excited about their product and what it can do. They can't wait to go share it, but they aren't stopping a minute to think about the benefit they're promoting may not be a big benefit to the customer they're trying to sell it to. The second failure that I find, and failure to me means I sit with salespeople on sales calls right along and I watch how they make a sales presentation and it does not result in a yes. And the next thing that quite frequently I see is that I'm almost never seen a building material salesperson make a sales presentation to a customer, whether it's an architect, dealer, distributor, builder, whoever it is, that at the end, that the customer doesn't look across the table and shake their head and say, you really do have a better product here. But then it doesn't result in a sale. And the reason it doesn't result in a sale is that the customer looks and says, this product is better, but it's not that much better than what I'm using today. Or another way, it's not better enough for me to go through the cost, the hassle, and the risk of changing. So you need to step back and say, okay, how can I communicate why it's a better product, and then realize what are all the cost, hassles, and risks that this, we'll say builder, once again, for example, is going to have to go through in order to change to your product. So now you need to have an understanding of those and then be able to minimize those changes. And so people just don't quite think of that. They think, well, as soon as they realize my product is better, they will change. And they don't look and say, people are looking for a product in today's world to be 100 times better, not 10% better, a lot better. And we think about in our personal lives how things change. How much better is Uber than a taxi cab? They're looking for that level of change. They're not looking for taxi cabs that are clean inside. That isn't enough of a change. It needs to be really big. Most of the time, the improvement in your product is not that big. It's not 100 times better. It's not an Uber instead of a cab. It's definitely an improvement, but it's not enough of an improvement. So you need to really understand what are all of the costs that your customer is going to incur to change. And cost can mean how he has to change his sourcing, how he has to change perhaps some computer programs in his system. Cost can be how he has to re-educate some people. It isn't necessarily writing you a check, but it is a cost to him if he has to, we'll say, reduce his efficiency for a little while or interrupt things in order to move from another product to you. It's not as simple as changing from Crest toothpaste to Colgate. It is much more involved for almost every customer that you're going to be selling to. Then there's also understanding the hassle. So if your customer is buying your competition from one supplier, and in order to buy your product, he's going to have to use another supplier, well, that is a hassle. So how do you reduce the hassle? And then the third and final part of reducing the cost of change is looking in his mind is what does he see the risk in the change is? And trust me, he sees risk. Okay. He may have never dealt with your company before. Maybe his contractors don't know how to install your product. There's some comfort level. And so you need to think about, in his mind, put yourself in his shoes. What risk is he seeing? And minimize that risk. Bring it up, address it. Don't let him keep it buried in his subconscious as another reason to not give you a yes when you're trying to sell him your product. So the idea, once again, is to realize just how much of an improvement is your product. And in most cases, it's not that big of an improvement. And then to look and say, what are the cost, hassle, and risk of change? And how can you help minimize those? Now, the third area where I see building material companies frequently fail with their sales messaging is that they only present the product as how the product is going to make the customer more successful. Let's say more profitable, more successful, whatever that measure is. Now, in this case, you've probably got the right message going to the right customer. Here's Mr. Contractor, here is the benefit to you of my product. You will make more money. You will get more jobs. You can do more with less labor. Those are all very good. And where people miss an opportunity here or fail to convert a customer is people will always respond more to prevent losing something than to potentially gain something. So if I would say to you, or you get an email and the subject line says, earn $1,000 in the next week versus do not lose $1,000 from your checking account. You're going to, I don't know the exact number, but it's like 5 to 1, 10 to 1. The message that says don't lose is going to get opened that much more often than you could gain. And so you also want to step back and think about what is the risk of the customer not using your product? What do they risk? And you can always find something that they risk by not changing. And you want to think about that and ideally, have that sales message, not necessarily lead with it, but you say, I don't know if the word here is negative, but something where you're making them think, have a little fear, a little bit of risk, even if you just subtly say it, will plant itself very firmly in their mind and make them think a little bit more seriously about why they should do business with you or buy your product instead of the other person. Okay? And one of the biggest things today in this is just how fast the world is changing. And so if they don't keep up with the change, they will be left behind. And they recognize that, and they don't want to be left behind. But yet they're unsure about necessarily how to move forward. You should be the guide to help them avoid this risk by doing business with your company or by buying your product instead of what they're doing today. The fourth area where I find building material company sales messages fail, and that is that not making the use of buying from you or buying your product more important. So when you think about the number of products that have to go into a house or a commercial building, that's the number of things that an architect, a builder, contractor, distributor, dealer, they have to think about all of those products. And what they're focused on is probably no more than 6 products that are causing a problem. And so you don't want to be one of those 6. Now, if you're one of those 6, they are really looking for how do I fix this problem, which may include changing suppliers or changing products. The problem is most of the time you walk in and you are number 92 on their list. So it's like, how do you elevate the importance of your message, your product, dealing with your company from number 92 up into, we'll say, the top 10? How do you bring those up? Well, the way you do this is by having a real good understanding of the key issues that your customer is facing today. It could be labor shortages, it could be competition, it could be rising cost of building materials, it could be many different things. And trust me, it's very different for a contractor than a distributor, than an architect, than a builder. You may see a lot of commonality, but there are very distinct differences, the problems they're having, and these problems are changing on a regular basis, certainly annually, if not more frequently than that. That what's on their mind is, what am I going to do about this? And frequently, that problem they're thinking about doesn't have anything to do with a product. So, for example, labor shortages, rising cost of building materials, you're trying to get them to change from, we'll say, the window they normally use to your window. Even if you make a great presentation, I said before, in which they go, you really do have a better window. I will give you that. Or you have an interesting business proposition. I will give you that. But I've got so many other things on my mind. I really can't deal with changing windows today. The windows I have today are working good enough. I've got these other problems I've got to solve. So if you understand what those problems are, and you go in by starting to talk about those problems, not about windows, and then you start to talk about how either your windows or dealing with your company can solve or is part of a solution to this big issue that he's facing, his top 3 or top 6, he's now going to stop and listen to you. He's going to pay real attention. You can see his body change when you start talking to him that way, because you've given him a new way of looking. you also raise your level of how he respects you, because he looks at you compared to your competition and says, this company really understands the problems I'm facing. The other window company, they're just interested in selling me windows. They really have no idea what the issues I'm facing today. This is really interesting. This company understands me. I probably should be doing business with them. It's amazing how many times that just having them feel that you get them better than your competition. It has nothing to do with your product. It has little to do with your company, but it has a lot to do with their confidence in you really understand us. So if you understand us, you're going to deliver products to us that help us solve our problems because you recognize what they are. And so don't just go in and have your product that's number 92 on their list and think that you're going to be able to communicate such a fantastic sales message that you're going to move yourself up from number 92 up into the top 10, which is the area where they're actually going to be making some changes. The only way you're going to do that is by dealing with your company or buying your product as a way to solve one of their big issues. Now, if you don't know what their big issues are, which you should, the first thing I recommend is that you are an avid reader of, let's say, builder trade magazines or architect trade magazines. That is the first thing that you should do, because you will start to see within those publications, an architect magazine, a contractor magazine, a builder magazine, or newsletter, you'll start to see a subject being mentioned over and over again. And that's a good clue to, okay, there's something going on here. Next way to do this is to ask your customers. Take some time and take your selling hat off and put on your Inspector Clouseau hat or your Columbo hat and just be curious. Just ask the architect, ask the builder, ask the contractor, what are the biggest problems that you're facing today? And what are you doing about them? And they will tell you. Then you step back and look and say, okay, how can dealing with us, how can our product help them solve one or more of their problems? And you will then elevate your product from, like I like to say, number 92 up into the top 10, which is where they're really focused on actually making changes. So I hope that this has been helpful to you to step back, and when you're looking at how to craft your sales messages to your customers, to not make these 4 common mistakes that I see being made on a very regular basis. If you think your company could benefit from some outside thinking on helping your sales messages, please reach out to me. Until next time, this is Mark Mitchell from Wizard Strategy.
Thank you for listening to this podcast from Mark Mitchell on building materials, sales, and marketing. We hope he gave you some fresh perspectives on how to grow your sales, and will listen to future episodes.